But Muller continues beyond historical contextualization to talk about doctrinal clarification. And he says that Calvin has a unique and distinctive contribution in the history of doctrine regarding Trinitarian personhood. He says, further now, still in PRRD 4, 325, he says, against Caroli, Calvin insisted that the discussion of the divinity of Christ, understood in the strictest sense as the divine essence, quote, all that is proper of God must be attributed to Christ, given that such discussion does not raise the issue of the distinction between the Father and Son, but addresses only the question of the divine essence itself as shared indivisibly by the three persons. In this sense, Calvin says, it is correct to say that Christ is the one eternal God existing of himself, end quote. See, as Muller moves from historical contextualization to doctrinal clarification, he speaks of Calvin's insistence on the way that the essence is shared indivisibly by the three persons. That quotation from Calvin, summarized by Muller, drives us inexorably to the conception of an irreducibly triune essence. Insofar as we speak of the essence that is common to the three, each person, quote, exists of himself. The Son is of the Father with reference to his person, yet exists of himself with reference to his essence. Calvin derives this conception from a strict doctrine of what is common to the three, namely self-existence. But Muller continues. Quote, Calvin continues his argument by denying explicitly that the Son is from the Father, quote, with respect to his eternal essence, end quote. Citing both Cyril of Alexandria and Augustine, Calvin comments that neither of these fathers would deny that Christ has life and immortality of himself, or that as God he was self-existent. The names and attributes that refer to the divine essence or substance belong equally to each of the divine persons, so that Christ is, quote, from another only as concerns his person, not as concerns his essence, which is underived, end quote. You see, at least these insights emerge. First, Calvin denies explicitly that the Son is from the Father with respect to his essence. The essence of the Son of God is neither generated nor communicated. It is not received. It is not from another. It is rather underived. That much is clear. Secondly, the names and attributes that refer to the divine essence or substance belong equally to each of the three persons who are God. And so, as we think of the essence, we think of the three persons. As we think of the three persons, we think of the essence. And a third point that emerges here is Calvin sees this doctrine of autotheos as being agreeable both to Cyril of Alexandria and Augustine. Neither of these fathers would deny that Christ is of himself as God and therefore self-existent, and from another only as concerns his person. Now, whether or not Calvin supplied adequate evidence to prove that from Cyril and from Augustine is another question, but Calvin himself understood his doctrine of autotheos as being in accord with Nicaea and as flowing from a patristic rooting in especially Augustine. Muller goes on to say, Calvin consistently agreed with traditional orthodoxy that the person of the Son subsists in relation to the Father by generation. But he also insists that, considered according to his full divinity, the Son shares the divine attribute of self-existence or asietas. After all, the essence is underived in the three persons, so that each of the persons contains in and of himself the full essence of the Godhead, end quote. That is Muller expressing irreducible, tripersonal essence as the bedrock of autothean personhood. Calvin maintained vigorously two things. He maintained vigorously that the Father generated the person of the Son in filiation, and that the Father and the Son spirated the person of the Spirit in their work of spiration. But he also maintained vigorously that the Father did not communicate divinity to the Son in or with the eternal act of generation. Why? Because each of the persons contains in and of himself the full essence of the Godhead. This is a doctrinal affirmation that cannot be maintained by Thomas Aquinas and his idea of an essence folded into the person of the Father as the principle for its unity. This, as Muller notes, is the traditional Western model. And listen to this. This is a fascinating quotation from Muller. He also argues, in direct contrast to the assessment of Thomas F. Torrance, that, quote, Calvin's view, like that of many of the later Reformed, follows out the line of the Western, Augustinian, Trinitarian model as defined by the Fourth Lateran Council rather than the Greek model. Now, I don't want to attribute this to Muller when I apply it to Thomas, but I want to generate a connection growing out of Muller's exposition of Calvin and apply it to what we said in the previous lecture. Calvin's view, like many of the later Reformed, follows the Western Augustinian model enshrined in the Fourth Lateran Council. And what is that? That the persons of the Trinity contain in and of themselves the full essence of the Godhead. And that it's a Greek model to suggest the essence is folded into the person of the Father initially. And then the essence is tripersonalized as he communicates it in procession. You see, Muller's observation here in PRRD 4 establishes a trajectory in Calvin's Trinitarian doctrine. Calvin follows a Western tradition, an Augustinian and Lombardian tradition, a tradition enshrined in the Fourth Lateran Council. Yet, refining that Western tradition, Calvin argued that the divinity of the Son is not given by way of communication along with the generation of his person. So he can affirm much that is in the Western model, and I think what Muller is saying is that Calvin is extending and refining the logic of Western Trinitarianism from Augustine to Lombard to the Fourth Lateran Council. And he is not following an Eastern model that through Dionysian influences infected Thomas. Calvin replaces the doctrine of consubstantial communicated essence with consubstantial common essence. Now, the doctrinal importance of this ought to be clear. The underlying logic of Calvin's autothean claim is that the essence of God is irreducibly tripersonal, and by that, now a bit more sophisticated, we mean it is ingenerate and uncommunicated. And the relations of opposition within the Trinity proceed in terms of that ineffable reality. Now, why is it so doctrinally important for this to be the case? Well, it's doctrinally important because decisive problems emerge if we deny it. And I want to give you at least two central ones. The first one, if we deny autotheos, the first problem that emerges is abstraction. abstraction. What do I mean by that? If the person of the Father generates the Son, and if the person of the Father communicates essence to the Son, then both the person and the essence of the Son are logically exterior to the person and essence of the Father. What does that mean? Well, it means that we can conceive of the Father's person and essence independently of the Son's person and essence within the divine processions. But if the person of the Father generates the Son, and the person of the Father communicates essence to the Son, and if the Son is logically exterior to the Father in that way, you have abstracted both the person and essence of the Son from the simple unity of the essence in the Father. And the doctrine of divine simplicity would be conceptually compromised by the abstraction of the Son's essence from the Father's essence. It is necessary to posit relations of opposition among the Trinitarian persons due to what is not common, but it is not necessary to apply the same logic to the essence. But for Calvin, there's no such need for an abstracted essence. In other words, let me put this differently just to communicate here. There is no such thing in Calvin of a pre-processional unified essence folded into the Father and a post-processional tripersonalized essence communicated to the Son and the Spirit. That abstracts the essence of the Son and Spirit from the essence of the Father. It suspends that tripersonalized essence on communicative acts from the Father. But for Calvin, there's no such need for this abstraction of essence. Calvin avoids abstraction. The relations of opposition within the Trinity, the filiation of the Son, the spiration of the Spirit, those occur within an irreducible triune essence. The essence of the Father, the essence of the Son, and the essence of the Holy Spirit is not logically exterior at any point. Each person is of himself that complete, undivided, tripersonal essence. There's no logical vantage point at which we can abstract the essence of one person from the other, requiring the need, rendering the need for a communication of essence. Tripersonal essence is logically interior to the whole Godhead. The Father's essence is not logically prior to the Son and Spirit. The Son and Spirit essence is not logically posterior to the Father's essence. It is irreducible and for that reason unabstractable. Each person is the essence is each person. So the first problem is abstraction. The second problem is a related problem of hierarchy. Now, of course, Thomas affirms plenal communication of the essence. But at the same time, he says that that essence resides in or is contained in the Father as the principle of its unity. That's the problem. Plenal essence being communicated preserves consubstantiality, but it does so at the expense of folding that essence into a single person in a pre-processional conception. But if you do that, you have this problem. You have what is common, namely essence, being given in the same act as what is proper, namely person. And it seems very difficult to avoid the notion of the priority of the Father's monarchy within the Godhead. The Father, on on that view, is the source of the Son's person by generation. The Father is the source of the Son's essence by communication, so that the Father is the one, the source, for both the diversity of the persons, generation and spiration, and the source of the unity of their essence, communication. This leads to the conclusion that not only is there a processional taxis among the persons, but as we surveyed earlier, this entails that there is a processional taxis of the essence. On a view that denies autotheos, essence processes with person, confounding the distinction between what is common and what is proper. And it leads to a form of hierarchy. So following Calvin, in order to avoid abstraction and hierarchy, we ought to ascribe rigorously what is common to the one essence and rigorously what is proper to the three persons, and conclude that the essence itself is irreducibly tripersonal, freed from all hierarchy and abstraction, and affirm relations of opposition as such. The essence is not initially reducible to a single person and then tripersonalized by communication. The Father has the essence from himself, the Son has the essence from himself, and the Spirit has the essence from himself. And remember, it was Bonaventure who introduced hierarchy into the Trinity on the basis of the exitus reditus model. Calvin, following Augustine, following the Western tradition, will have no such abstraction and hierarchy as is found in the Eastern model, that I do believe, quite clearly by his own admission, infected Thomas's formulations. Now, I want you to appreciate this fact as we move on. Muller not only has given us historical context, not only given us doctrinal clarification, but he also provides a window of historical continuity between Calvin and expressions of Calvin's theology in the developing tradition of Reformed scholasticism. And I'm not going to give you a full sample here, but I do want to give you just a couple of observations and insights from Muller and from Tipton. Muller cites the work of William Perkins. And William Perkins, in A Golden Chain, very elegantly expressed the doctrine of autothean processions. He says, quote, "When considered in terms of his sonship, the second person of the Trinity is begotten and second in order. When considered in terms of essence, however, he is God a se ipso. The divine essence as such is not begotten." And he says, although the Son be begotten of his Father, yet nevertheless he is of and by himself very God. For he must be considered either according to his essence or according to his filiation or sonship. In regard to his essence, he is autotheos, that is, of and by himself very God. For the deity, which is common to all three persons, is not begotten. But as he is a person and the Son of the Father, he is not of himself, but from another. For he is the eternal Son of his Father. And thus he is truly said to be very God of very God. For this cause he is said to be sent from the Father. This sending taketh not away the causality, taketh not away the equality of essence and power, but declareth the order of persons. His proper manner of working is to execute actions from the Father by the Holy Ghost. That's a wonderful quote. The first was the summary of Muller. The second, in the older English, was the statement of Perkins. And let me summarize it. You're starting to see the pattern here. In his filiation, the Son is of the Father, in that relation of opposition. But in his essence, the Son is, quote, of himself, and by himself, very God. While his filiation as Son is from the Father, in regard to his essence, he is autotheos. Why? Quote, the deity is common to all the persons. One more quote from Perkins. For the thing itself, it is Christ who must be considered two ways, as he is Son and as he is God. As he is Son, he is not of himself, but the Son of the Father, begotten of him. Nevertheless, as he is God, he is of himself, neither begotten nor proceeding. For the essence or Godhead of the Father is of itself without beginning, but the Godhead of the Son is one and the same with the Godhead of the Father. Because by what Godhead the Father is God, by the same and no other, the Son is God. Therefore, the Son, as he is God, he is God of himself without beginning, even as the Father. Whereupon it follows that the Son is begotten of the Father as he is Son, but not as he is God. Can you hear, to hearken back to the first opening material from Thomas, do you hear the difference? The Father is not a principle without principle, understood as the source of the Son's person and essence. The Reformed, following Calvin, self-consciously, programmatically reject that. As what? Leading toward abstraction, leading toward subordination, ism, leading toward hierarchy. So the Son is begotten of the Father as he is Son, yet he has essence of himself just as the Father does. Now, this means then that as we think about the doctrinal reception of Calvin among theologians such as Perkins and others, what do we see? We see, according to Muller, and I think he's right here, a self-conscious extension of a Western, Augustinian, Lombardian, Lateran doctrine of the consubstantial persons of the Godhead, as they are irreducibly identical within the essence of God. And the distinction between the Son being Son from the Father, yet the Son being God of himself, the same applying to the Spirit, that simply is the refinement and the trajectory of the Western Trinitarian heritage that Calvin traced back to Augustine, and Muller does as well. Now, what we need to do is think about the way Calvin's doctrine of the Trinity, the irreducible triune essence of God, and the corresponding affirmation of autothean personhood has been received in the tradition, and how it has been applied and appropriated to contrasting views. And I want to move into that and talk about at least two streams of reception of Calvin's theology of the Trinity as we move forward.